Hello and welcome to this second video on EIGRP configuration for the CCNA exam. In our first video we looked at basic EIGRP configuration, the type of configuration commands needed for anyone attempting the CCNA exam. This also includes ICND1 and ICND2 exams. In the second video we're going to look at troubleshooting the EIGRP Neighbor relationship. Now, troubleshooting the neighbor relationships for EIGRP and OSPF will be a big part of your CCNA tests. We will look at OSPF neighbor relationship configuration in a later video. Here, completely focused on EIGRP. We're going to use the same sets of routers that we did before. So I've got routers 1 through 4. We can see the networks that those routers are connected to. And I've already configured the interfaces with relevant IP addresses. And I've partially configured EIGRP. But this time that I've introduced several problems for us to try and troubleshoot. Now, on your production network, there might be lots of reasons why two EIGRP routers can't form a neighbor relationship. The CCNA exam will narrow this big list down to a small number of potential problems. And if you were doing a CCNA test, if you were to work your way through this list of potential problems, you should be able to discover which problem is preventing your two routers from forming a neighbor relationship. So before we get into the routers themselves, let's just list the potential problems you want to look for when troubleshooting EIGRP in your CCNA exam. The first thing to look for is to make sure that the EIGRP protocol itself is enabled. It may be that the router that you're troubleshooting hasn't got the EIGRP process configured. The second thing to make sure of is the autonomous system number. In order for two EIGRP routers to form a neighbor relationship, the autonomous system numbers must match. The third thing to look at are the interfaces. Has EIGRP been configured for the interfaces over which you want to form a neighbor relationship? If EIGRP has not been configured for the interface, then that interface will not send or accept hello packets, and EIGRP cannot form a relationship over those interfaces. The fourth thing to look for are passive interfaces. EIGRP will not allow neighbor relationships to be formed over passive interfaces, although those passive interfaces will still be included in your EIGRP topology. The final thing to look at would be K values. The K values dictate the weight given to bandwidth and delay, plus the other EIGRP metrics when EIGRP is working out its metric values. We'll be looking at the default K values in just a minute when we start looking at our routers. But if two routers have different K values, they will not form a neighbor relationship. So, as you look at troubleshooting the neighbor relationships in your CCNA exam, you should have these potential problems identified. You should have them written down, and then as you look through each router, just check off each one in turn. And if each one of these is at their default settings, or each one of these matches between a pair of routers, then you should have a neighbor relationship. If these values don't match, then that's probably why the neighbor relationship hasn't been formed. So let's now jump into router 1 and have a look at its configuration first, before moving on to routers 2, 3 and 4. So here we are on router 1's console. If we remember back to our diagram, router 1 should have formed neighbor relationships with router 2 and router 3. EIGRP is configured on here, so let's see which neighbouring devices it has formed a neighbor relationship with. To do this, we can use this command, show IP EIGRP neighbours. The show IP EIGRP neighbours command will show us a list of neighbouring devices that router 1 has formed a relationship with. And here we can see that we only have one EIGRP neighbour. That neighbour has an IP address of 11.0.0.2. This means that at least one of our neighbour relationships has not been established. Now, it could be that this router has got problems, it could be this router has been misconfigured, or it could be the neighbouring device. So what we need to do is try and narrow down and identify first of all whether it's this router that's been misconfigured, and if it's not this router, we can then jump to the second router and determine what the problem is over there. So the next command I'm going to use in my troubleshooting process is show IP protocols. Now, show IP protocols provides quite detailed information about my EIGRP configuration. Starting at the top here, we can see that the routing protocol is EIGRP, then a number 1. This is the autonomous system number that this router is using, autonomous system number 1. I would expect that the neighbouring device would also have the same autonomous system number. As stated previously, if this autonomous system number doesn't match, a neighbour relationship can't be formed. The next thing for us to look at are the K values. And notice here we have 5 K values, 3 values set to 0, but K1 equals 1 and K3 equals 1. These are the default K values, the default metric weights that are used by the EIGRP process. Again, if I want this router to form a neighbour relationship with another device, we would expect that the neighbouring device has these matching K values. Moving down our list of information, we can see a section, routing for networks. Now, router 1 has 3 directly connected networks, 3 interfaces, and each interface should have EIGRP configured. And there, routing for networks, we can see that this router is routing for networks 10, 11, and 172.16. If we do show IP route, these are 3 directly connected networks for my device. So, EIGRP is configured. It is configured for the interfaces on this router. We are using autonomous system number 1. We're using the default K values, and there are no passive interfaces. How do we know there are no passive interfaces? Well, if we scroll up to our show IP protocols command, if there were passive interfaces, they'd be identified in this command. So all in all, router 1 looks good. Its configuration looks good. So what we need to do now is to identify which router I have formed the neighbour relationship with, and then go to the other router and try and troubleshoot the problem. So if you remember, the IP address of my neighbour was 11.0.0.2. So I'm connected to that router on my Fast Ethernet 01 interface. So it is the router on the 10 network that I'm having trouble connecting to. If we flip back to our diagram, we can see the router on the 10 network that I have not formed a relationship with is router 2. So it's router 2 that I'm going to go to next and try and troubleshoot this problem. So now I'm router 2. We're going to follow a very similar set of steps that we did on router 1, starting off with the show IP EIGRP Neighbors command. The command this time on router 2 shows us that the EIGRP process is running, but we don't have any neighbour relationships. Now I'd expect that router 2 should have neighbour relationships with both router 1 and router 4, so we need to start investigating now and figuring out why. Now remember our series of steps. Is EIGRP configured? Well, we can see from that command that EIGRP is configured for the process 1, which is good. The second thing we want to check is the autonomous system number. Now the process number there should match the autonomous system number we're using. But if we want to check this, again, show IP protocols is the command that we need. So just by looking at the first part of the show IP protocols command, we can see that we are routing for EIGRP 1. So again, that's the autonomous system number. Router 1 was using that number, so that matches. That's not the problem. While we're here as well, we can also check the K values. So K1 equals 1, K3 equals 1. They're the default K values, so that shouldn't be causing a problem in our neighbor relationship. As we scroll down, we can see we are routing for networks 10 and network 12. And if you want to flip back to the diagram, you will see the router 2 is connected to network 10 and network 12. So again, that's good. But we can also see here that one of my interfaces is set to a passive interface. In fact, it's fast Ethernet 00 that is set to be a passive interface. Now, one other command that we can use in the CCNA exam, and that I've always been able to use, is show running config. Now, if we scroll down my running config and get to the EIGRP section, we can see that I've got two network statements, one for network 10, one for network 12. They would enable EIGRP on those two networks. Again, I can see that I am EIGRP is installed, that I'm using autonomous number 1, but then we have that passive interface command, passive interface fast Ethernet 00. Now that is the interface that's connecting me to router 1. Because it's passive, it will not allow a neighbor relationship to be formed over there, but it will include those networks on the interface as part of my topology table. But if I want to form a neighbor relationship over fast Ethernet 00, they have to go to conf-t, router EIGRP 1, and then we'll use the no passive interface fast Ethernet 00 command. By removing this passive interface configuration, EIGRP now will begin to send hello packets across fast Ethernet 00. It will importantly accept hello packets as well, and as long as the rest of the criteria match, is the autonomous system number correct, do the K values match, then it should form a neighbor relationship almost straight away. And there you go, we can see the neighbor relationship there has come up, and we have a neighbor 10001, that's router 1. If we're not sure, if we're in doubt, we can go back to router 1 and run the show IP EIGRP neighbors command on there, or if I run it now in router 2, there you go, we can see that neighbor relationship's been established. So in this example, on router 2, it was the passive interface that's been configured that prevented it from forming a neighbor relationship with router 1. But it's still not formed a neighbor relationship with router 3. So before we, with router 4. So before we jump to router 4, let's just make sure that, again, it is configured properly on here first, that there's no nothing we've missed on this side. So again, show IP protocols, autonomous system numbers 1, K values at their default settings, no passive interfaces now, and we're routing for all the networks on our interfaces. This configuration looks good. So whatever the problem is, I suspect it's on router 4 and not router 2. So let's jump now to router 4 and try and troubleshoot EIGRP on there. Here we are then on the console of router 4, and we're going to use some of the same show commands we've used previously to try and diagnose any EIGRP issues that are on this router. We're going to start off with show IP EIGRP neighbors, and we can see here the EIGRP process has been enabled, or else there wouldn't be any output at all, but we can also see it's been enabled for process 2. Now the process number here matches the autonomous system number that's been used when EIGRP was configured. So my other routers were using autonomous system number 1, this is using autonomous system number 2. We can verify this by using the show IP protocols command, where we can see here that again routing protocol is EIGRP, but it's EIGRP 2, so autonomous system number 2. And as we said previously, if you've got different autonomous system numbers, the routers are not going to form neighbor relationships. So at this point, there's no need to look at any other part of the configuration. That's our issue. So what we're going to do is clean up our config a little bit and then reconfigure EIGRP. I'm going to start off by going to global config and typing no router EIGRP 2. We don't need that configuration. It's going to clutter up our config if we leave it there, so get rid. And then we're going to type in router EIGRP 1. From here, we're going to add the relevant network statements that will enable EIGRP on the interfaces on my router. And as I do so, hopefully they will start to form neighbor relationships with neighboring devices. So we'll start off by adding network 12. And we can see there a neighbor relationship's been formed. And network 13. So we're essentially matching the two network statements that had previously been configured under the wrong EIGRP process. So adding network 13 there. Excellent stuff. Two neighbor relationships established. So now if we go back to running config, back to the enable prompt and do show IP EIGRP neighbors, we've got two neighboring devices there now. If we go to router 2, so on router 2 we can see that another neighbor relationship's come up. If we do show IP EIGRP neighbors, two neighbor relationships, and finally if we go to router 3, on router 3 show IP EIGRP neighbors, and router 3 has also got two neighbor relationships. So at this point we've troubleshooted several problems: passive interfaces and the wrong autonomous system numbers, as well as running show commands to make sure that EIGRP is installed and available and configured on the correct networks. But there's one other thing that we need to consider, or one other thing we need to look at in this video, and it starts off by just having a quick look back at our network diagram. This is our network diagram then that we've been using in the last two videos, and what I'm particularly interested in at the minute is this network that's hanging off router 4, this 131.107.0.0 network. If EIGRP is configured, and it's configured to advertise all on all interfaces, it will advertise all networks associated with those interfaces. So if I was to look at router 1's routing table, I would expect to see an EIGRP learned route for 131.107.0.0/16. So let's jump to router 1 and see if that 131.107.0.0 route appears. On router 1 then, if we run show IP route and just take a quick look at router 1's routing table. So on here we can see that we've got networks for network 10, 11 and 172.16 directly connected networks. We can also see EIGRP learned networks for network 12 and 13, but there's no network 131.107. That's not been advertised this router. Now again, on production networks there could be lots of reasons why this network is not being advertised to router 1. But for the CCNA exam, if a network doesn't appear, chances are the interface that is on that network has not been added to the EIGRP process. So if we are not seeing it on router 1, we need to jump to router 4, because that's the router that's physically connected to that network, and see if that interface has been configured for EIGRP. On router 4, there's a few show commands we can use to verify if EIGRP is being configured on that interface. One is show IP protocols. Now under IP protocols we can see which interfaces and which networks EIGRP is configured to route for. So we can see that EIGRP is being configured on Fast Ethernet 01 and Fast Ethernet 00, and those are the interfaces connected to my 12 and 13 network. We can also see that EIGRP is routing for the 12 and 13 network, but not network 131.107. If we do show IP interface brief, we can see that I have an interface attached to that network. It's my loopback interface. So the interface is up, that's a good thing. If we do show run, or show running config, and scroll down to the EIGRP section, Here we can see that EIGRP just has two network statements. Network 12, network 13. So EIGRP has not been configured to work on that loopback interface, so therefore it will not advertise its networks. So if we fix this, we got conf t router EIGRP 1, then the network statement 131.107.0.0, and like before, our router now will go off and look for any interface that's on the 131.107 network, enable EIGRP on there, and then start advertising any network associated with that interface through the EIGRP topology table. So in very quick order, now we've got the network statement added on router 4. If we go back to router 1, so back on router 1 now, if we do show IP route, there we can see network 131.107 has been added as an EIGRP learned route. So in this video, we have looked at troubleshooting EIGRP neighbor relationships. We've identified the common EIGRP neighbor relationship problems you'll expect to find in the CCNA exam, and use show commands on our routers to try and diagnose what issues our routers were having regarding our EIGRP neighbor configuration. In the final video in the EIGRP series, we will look at some additional EIGRP issues that you might face in the CCNA exams, including load balancing, equal cost and equal cost load balancing. We'll talk a little bit more about passive interfaces, and we'll also take a look at the EIGRP topology table as well. Thank you.